Kendall Crowe is Director of Policy and Advocacy with Business SA. Good morning, Kendall Crowe. Kendall, thank you for joining us. Look, that's the other side of this equation, isn't it? That is, if you just, with the best of intentions, sometimes bad things happen, and you as an employer could be faced with the sort of bill that could be the end of your business for, it might be a little cafe or it might be a factory or whatever. Your side of this equation is trying to keep the risks down and the premiums down.
Yeah, and I think the first point to make is that I don't think any employer is out there trying to make an unsafe workplace for their workers. They all want exactly the same as the workers do, in that nobody comes to work and gets injured. But the reality is these things happen, and the scheme is set up to, I guess, pay out or look after workers when they are injured. But at the end of the day, somebody needs to pay for those injuries, or at least the medical costs and the employment costs that flow on from that. The issue that I have is we haven't been able to read the McKell report yet. It's just come out this morning that we've seen in the paper. But some of the things that have been said aren't quite right. Where it was said that the cost is ultimately borne by workers. Well, that's factually incorrect. The cost is borne by employers. The employers of South Australia pay for this scheme. So to say that the workers pay for it is blatantly incorrect. The other thing to add is that it's really difficult to compare scheme on scheme across the country, because they're all based on different pieces of legislation. So one might look really good in this light, and then in a different light look not so good. And so comparing South Australia with some other states doesn't really wash either.
Edward Kavanagh, do you accept that it's not the workers who are paying for the scheme, or
No,
did you mean that they're paying for it in terms of poverty?
Yeah, no. Certainly, that's a bit of a misconstrued interpretation of what I was saying. I was saying there's individuals who have lifelong costs whose compensation often is cut off or is limited, and for those individuals who have ongoing medical costs, etc., they do bear some of the cost of their own injury over a long period of time. That's the fact, and obviously there's also a premium that businesses pay into the system. That's how it's funded. So that's just the reality of how the scheme works.
We're going to quickly run out of time, and something that I'm sure would occupy better minds than mine for days and days and days. Kendall Crowe, just to sum up, is Business SA happy with the workers' compensation scheme that we've got here in South Australia?
We're watching it very carefully after the Summerfield case last year and the decision made by the government to take a separate approach with a second bill that came through. We're watching it very carefully to see that premiums don't go above the 1.9%. They're at 1.85, which is already very much up there with some of the highest in the country, which makes South Australia less competitive. And one other thing I wanted to add was, despite people not being paid for their weekly payments like they would get a salary after 2 years, after that point there is a stage where they get their whole person impairment measured, and after that they can get pretty hefty payouts. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for some people. So whilst they're not necessarily made an seriously injured worker, they're still walking away with quite a lot of money to cover off for those things that have been discussed by the McKell Institute.
Kendall Crowe, thank you very much for your time for Business SA. Before that, Dale Beasley from Unions SA, and Michael Kavanagh, who wrote this report that's been released today into Workers' Comp.